Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And, today we're tackling someone we've covered before, someone who's no stranger to making waves. And, yeah, this piece is certainly no exception.
Oh, absolutely. Not afraid to ruffle some feathers, that's for sure.
No, no holding back. This is classic Glenn Ford we're talking about.
Exactly. And this one is called Both Major U.S. Parties Are Plagues on Humanity. So, right off the bat, he's not pulling any punches.
Oh, yeah, he's going straight for the jugular there. And even though it was published way back in 2015, it's striking how much it still resonates today.
Yeah, it really does. Ford had this incredible ability to cut through the noise and get to the heart of the matter. And in this case, he's taking aim at the whole two-party system, Democrats, Republicans, the whole shebang.
Yeah, and he doesn't mince words. He just comes right out and says there's not a dime's worth of difference between them.
And he throws in some pretty big names, too, like Obama and the Clintons, even the Butishes.
All lumped together.
Yep, all painted with the same brush of what he calls corporate soullessness. It's a pretty bold statement.
Definitely makes you sit up and take notice.
Yeah.
So what's the core of his argument here?
Well, it boils down to this idea that both parties are ultimately serving the same masters, big corporations, special interests, and that their main goal is to maintain U.S. global dominance no matter the cost.
So he's saying it's not really about ideology or left versus right. It's about power and who's really pulling the strings.
Exactly. He sees this obsession with power and profit driving all their policies, whether it's domestic or, international.
So basically he's saying we're all being played.
Pretty much he argues that the system is rigged to benefit the elite and that the rest of us are just pawns in their game.
A pretty cynical view of things, but he does back it up with some pretty compelling examples.
Right. He dives into some specifics like Hillary Clinton's time as Secretary of State and her role in the 2011 intervention in Libya.
Yeah, that was a messy situation.
To say the least. And Ford really zeroes in on that quote from Clinton about Gaddafi's death. We saw he died. Right. And he uses it to highlight what he sees as a kind of callous disregard for the consequences of these military interventions.
Like it's all just a game to them.
Yeah, that's the sense you get from Ford's analysis.
But to be fair, the situation in Libya was incredibly complex. You had NATO involved, various rebel groups with their own agendas.
Oh, absolutely. It was a tangled web, and I think it's important to understand all those nuances. But Ford's point is that both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have this tendency to resort to military force too quickly and often without fully grasping the long-term consequences.
He even goes so far as to call Obama the more effective evil compared to Bush, which is a pretty provocative statement.
It is, and it's tied to this idea that Obama was actually more successful at pushing a so-called hit list of countries targeted for regime change.
A hit list, it's a serious accusation.
It is, and to understand where he's coming from, we need to go back a bit to a document called Project for a New American Century.
Okay, I've heard of that. It was published back in 1997
Right.
by a group of neoconservative thinkers.
Right. And they basically laid out a blueprint for a more aggressive U.S. foreign policy, strong military preemptive strikes, asserting American dominance on the world stage, all that.
So this wasn't just some fringe group.
Yeah.
Their ideas actually had an impact.
Oh, yeah. A lot of those involved with the project ended up in key positions in the Bush administration. People like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz.
Wow. So they really did put these ideas into practice.
They did. And while Bush talked about spreading democracy and Obama framed it more as humanitarian intervention, Ford sees a disturbing continuity in their actions. Like, it's all just different packaging for the same underlying goal.
Which is?
U.S. global domination, plain and simple.
Okay, so both parties are ultimately serving the same masters.
Yeah.
They're both pushing this aggressive foreign policy, and they're both willing to use military force to get what they want. That's a pretty bleak picture.
It is, and it gets even bleaker when you consider what Ford has to say about the whole election process.
Because if we can't even choose different leaders, how can we change anything?
Yeah, exactly, and that's where Ford's cynicism really comes through. He calls U.S. elections reality creation festivals. Meaning that both parties pretend to offer different visions, but it's all just to show the real decisions are being made behind closed doors far away from the public eye.
So it's all just an illusion of choice.
Pretty much, he argues that the system is designed to keep us distracted and divided while the elites maintain their grip on power.
So if we can't trust, the government can't trust the media and can't even trust the electoral process, where does that leave us?
It's a tough question, and Ford doesn't offer any easy answers.
But he does offer a challenge.
Absolutely. He's calling on us to wake up, to see the world as it really is, and to fight for a better future.
To not accept the status quo.
Exactly, and to start questioning everything.
Okay, so that's the challenge, but where do we even begin?
Well, I think the first step is to educate ourselves, to read diverse sources, to challenge the mainstream narrative, and to really grapple with the complexities of these issues.
So knowledge is power. But it can feel pretty overwhelming, like one person against the system.
It can, but that's where community comes in, finding like-minded people who share your concerns and are working towards change.
Strength in numbers.
Exactly. Collective action is essential for challenging entrenched systems of power.
Okay, so awareness, community, and what about concrete action? What can we actually do to make a difference?
Well, Ford really emphasizes the importance of direct action. It's not enough to just talk about change. You have to be willing to put your words into action.
Like protesting, organizing, supporting alternative media, maybe even running for office yourself.
Exactly. Getting involved, getting your hands dirty, not being afraid to challenge the status quo.
And it's about remembering that even small acts of resistance can have a ripple effect.
Absolutely don't underestimate the power of individual actions, especially when they're combined with the efforts of others.
And that brings me to something else I think is crucial. Hope. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of such a massive system. But history is full of examples of people coming together and creating change against all odds.
It is, and while Ford might not offer a step-by-step guide to revolution, his work is ultimately a call for hope, for a belief that a better world is possible.
It's a reminder that we don't have to accept the status quo, that we have the power to shape our own future.
Exactly, and that's a powerful message.
So to our listener, if you're feeling inspired by Ford's message, but also a bit overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge, remember this knowledge is power, community is strength, action is key, and hope is essential.
Well said, and if this deep dive has left you with more questions than answers, that's a good thing.
It means Ford's work has sparked your critical thinking, and that's exactly what he would have wanted.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep fighting for a better world.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And it kind of reminds me of something else. Ford brings up the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Ah, yes, the Congo, a truly heartbreaking situation.
And he doesn't hold back. He calls it the largest genocide since World War II.
It's a stark assessment, but sadly, the numbers back it up. Millions have died in this conflict.
And Ford argues that the U.S. has played a direct role in fueling this violence through its support of various armed groups.
And he doesn't let any administration off the hook either, Clinton, Bush, Obama. He sees them all as complicit to some degree.
Wow, so he's basically saying that the pursuit of U.S. power and profit has come at the expense of millions of lives.
That's the crux of his argument. He sees this as the inevitable outcome of a system that prioritizes these things above human life.
It's a pretty damning indictment, and it makes you wonder about the whole idea of U.S. exceptionalism. This idea that we're a force for good in the world.
Right. Ford really challenges that notion. He sees the U.S. as an empire built on violence and exploitation, and he argues that this dark side of our history is often ignored or downplayed.
And it ties back to his whole point about the two-party system, this idea that it doesn't really matter who's in charge because the underlying system remains the same.
Exactly. He argues that the real decisions are being made by the power brokers behind the scenes, the corporations, the lobbyists, the military-industrial complex.
And that the elections are just a way to give the illusion of choice.
He even calls them reality creation festivals. These carefully staged events designed to distract us from the real issues.
So we're all just playing our parts in this grand charade.
Pretty much. And he doesn't just blame the politicians. He also criticizes the media for their role in perpetuating this system.
So if we can't trust the government, can't trust the media, and can't even trust the electoral process, where does that leave us?
It's a bleak picture for sure, but I think Ford's point is not to despair, but to wake up.
To see the system for what it is and to start fighting for something better.
Exactly. He's calling for a radical transformation, a complete overhaul of the system.
But how do we even begin to do that? It seems like such a daunting task.
It is, but I think the first step is awareness, recognizing the problem, understanding how the system works, and then starting to challenge it in whatever ways we can.
So education is key.
Absolutely. We need to read widely to expose ourselves to different perspectives and to develop our own critical thinking skills.
And we need to connect with others who share our concerns to build a movement for change.
Exactly. Collective action is essential for challenging entrenched systems of power.
And that brings us to another important point. Hope. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, but we can't afford to give up.
Right. Ford's work is ultimately a call for hope, a belief that a better world is possible.
It's a reminder that we don't have to accept the status quo, that we have the power to shape our own future.
And that's a powerful message to carry with us.
So we've got this huge challenge ahead of us, this deeply entrenched system that Ford is critiquing. But where do we even begin to dismantle something so massive?
Yeah, it can feel pretty overwhelming, right? Like, where do you even start?
Exactly. It's like David versus Goliath.
But, even David had to start somewhere.
True. So what would be the first step in this case?
Well, I think Ford's work really highlights the importance of awareness. You can't change what you don't understand, right?
So step one, educate yourself.
Yeah, read diverse sources, challenge the mainstream narratives, really dig into these issues and try to see the world from different perspectives.
Okay, that makes sense. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Absolutely. But it's not just about individual knowledge. It's also about connecting with others who share your concerns.
Finding your tribe, so to speak.
Yeah, building community is crucial because there's strength in numbers and, collective action is really the only way to challenge these entrenched systems of power.
Okay, so awareness, community building. Those are good starting points. But what about concrete action? How do we actually translate these ideas into tangible change?
Well, Ford's a big believer in direct action. It's not enough to just talk about change. You have to be willing to put your words into action.
So what does that look like?
It could take many forms, protesting, organizing, supporting alternative media, maybe even running for office yourself.
Getting involved, getting your hands dirty.
Yeah.
Not being afraid to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that even small acts of resistance can have a ripple effect,
Like the butterfly effect.
Yeah, exactly. You never know how your actions might inspire others or contribute to larger movements for change.
So don't underestimate the power of individual action, especially when it's combined with the efforts of others.
Right. And that brings us to another crucial element, hope.
Hope. Because it's easy to get discouraged, right, when you're facing such a huge uphill battle.
It is, but I think Ford's work ultimately offers a message of hope, this belief that a better world is possible.
Even if it's a long and difficult road to get there.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we don't have to accept the status quo, that we have the power to shape our own future.
And that's a pretty empowering message.
It is. It's a call to action, but it's also a call to hope.
So to our listener, if you're feeling inspired by Ford's message, but also a bit overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge, remember, this knowledge is power community, strength action is key, and hope is essential.
Well said. And if this deep dive has left you with more questions than answers, that's a good thing. It means Ford's work has sparked your critical thinking, and that's exactly what he would have wanted.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep fighting for a better world.
That's the spirit.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's been a thought-provoking one for sure.
It always is with Glenn Ford. He really makes you think.
That he does. And
Yeah.
to our listeners out there, keep those questions coming, keep those conversations going, and let's all keep working towards that better world.
Until next time.
Take care, everybody.